Welcome to the 7 Investing Podcast. I am Dan Klein, or as I introduce myself on our 7 Investing Now live show, I am Daniel Brooks Klein. I bring that up because my guest today is Kelly Brooks, no relation, not related on my mother's side. Brooks is my mother's maiden name because there are no male relatives, so it's also my son's middle name as well to sort of keep the name alive. Unrelated completely to this interview. I'm very excited to have Kelly on. She is the CEO and founder of Quarter4, an AI-driven predictive sports data and analytics provider for sports media and betting companies. That is a lot. We are going to unpack it as we go along, but let's give a little background on Kelly before we have her say hello. For over 15 years, Kelly has been a technology leader, driving the development of hundreds of innovative software applications across North America. In 2010, she founded Speakfield Corporation, an award-winning mobile development agency located in Canada's leading tech ecosystem. As you could tell, that's the bio from the website. That is not the personal part of it. Kelly, welcome to the program.
Thank you for having me. I'm excited to be on this. I read some of your past stuff when you were part of another investment, online media piece, and that was years ago. So I'm familiar.
It's been an incredibly changing world, and we're going to get to that. We talked off air a little bit about how just in the pro sports world, it went from gambling being a taboo. Like Al Michaels talked today about how he used to love throwing in little hidden gambling speak, and now he's basically giving the line during the game. I was sitting in Seattle a few years ago, and I forget which team, if it was Seattle or San Francisco, scored a meaningless touchdown to lose by 2, and the crowd went crazy, and I couldn't figure out why, and it had to do with the betting line. But we are going to talk about all of that. But Kelly, before we do that, I think some background is going to be helpful here. Why don't you give an overview of what Quarter4 does and sort of why you founded the company?
Yeah, so Quarter4 was a beautiful mistake. And I say that in the best possible way. So as you had mentioned with my bio, I ran a tech company for about 10 years. That was my first startup. And we always did progressive tech. Where's blockchain? Where's mobile going? I just love technology. My co-founder, Daniela Kovic, was also part of that organization. She's co-founded Quarter4 with me. So actually, about 2.5 years ago, there was an inkling that the Toronto Raptors, my favorite NBA team, would make the playoff run. So I thought, hey, there's a lot of discussion around this technology called AI. So I pulled over my cream of the crop developers and put a challenge to them. And I said, looks like the Raptors might actually go somewhere. Kyle Lowry is my favorite athlete. Could we run a bit of a prediction engine using this AI stuff? And the team was excited. So we brought in a couple of college students from a local college that were also learning AI at the time. And they developed this little engine using 6 years of back history. So by the time the playoffs came around and they actually made the playoffs, we predicted that the Raptors would take the playoffs and win everything, and that Kyle Lowry would excel in assists throughout the series. And both of those came true. So Danielle and I, a little light bulb went off. And at the same time, we had no idea. In parallel, sports betting in the US, the regulation, everything was happening there. So it was a beautiful merge. I don't have a background in sports. I don't have a background in betting, but I have a background in progressive tech and in solving with it. And this is where we are 2 years later. We are now 20 employees. We just closed a $1.6 million round. We actually have to turn away investors. We oversubscribed. And the platform is now, as of September, NFL automatically predicting over 2 million forecasts a day for every play-by-play of every athlete on the field for multiple sports.
Well, congratulations. So you just touched upon something that I wasn't aware of going into it, that you didn't have a sports background. Now, your product, and I'll read from your little graphic that I copied into our script. You are working for sports books, daily fantasy platforms, casinos, content providers, technology providers, data providers, and leagues and teams. Do you think the fact that you didn't have a sports background actually helped you be agnostic? Because if I was doing what you were doing, I would just be using this data to be better at betting, and I would have missed the wider picture. And clearly, you're somewhat agnostic as to what you're doing with your data.
And it's been a benefit. Number one, the sports betting industry, it's quite flat. and sports industry in general. And people were craving for this type of disruption. So when Danielle and I, two Canadian women, came into this industry, they took us with open arms. They're like, what are you doing? This sounds so fantastic. We haven't heard of this before. And we were able to, get on a Zoom call, get into, a room with people who are basically godfathers of this industry, ex-athletes, people that normally they'd be like, stunned to be discussing with. And Danielle and I were able to walk in and talk about the data and sell product without having those stars in our eyes, and having that preconceived notion of what betting was and what sports were. We're like, we have technology. This industry needs to be disrupted. Everybody's doing everything the same way. How are your users even excited about what you're doing? And that's the approach that we took.
So we're not even that many years away from Moneyball, the famous Michael Lewis book, which basically was the beginning of analytics. That was the story of the first executive who said, "Well, I don't have enough money, so I have to be smarter." Are we at a tipping point where everything from legalization to every team has an analytics department, and is using data? Are we sort of seeing this become widespread? And if that's true, how do you sort of have an advantage when everyone is trying to do the same thing?
Yeah, and that's a great question. And you know what it is? Right now, everybody has data. What Quarter4 is we interpret the data. So you have a lot of people collecting and providing data, but the hurdle is, okay, we have so much, what do we do with it? And we essentially have that connector piece. We take that data, run it through our deep learning neural network, and produce very unique insights from that data that someone can grab right away and start dropping it into content into their own platforms. So you have a group that's actively producing the data, but then you have a group like us that are powerfully creating, insights out of that data. And I think that's where we differentiate.
So you're using this for sports. Is there any reason it couldn't work in other areas? I think specifically, we don't day trade at Seven Investing. We are long-term investors. But I would think you could use this technology to, say, identify like who the winners are going to be in a certain space 10 years from now. That type of interesting play there.
Exactly. And we've had that, inquiry when we were doing our raise and everything. We had a number of investors say, where else can we use this? Can we use this in finance? Can we use this in politics? Like, where can we use this? And our answer is always yes, it can be transferred. But I got to tell you, being in the sports industry has been the funnest, industry that I've ever been in. And think about where we are in sports. We are just at the tip of the iceberg with esports. We are at the front of the globalization access to sports that we've never even heard of. So I'm like, if by the time we actually import all of the sports into Quarter4 for all of the betting opportunities out there, I think that it's just going to be gigantic as it is. And it's just a crazy transforming industry. And that's where we're focusing right now.
So how do you prevent paralysis by analysis? And I'll give an example. I've played with like 25 different smartwatches. And I've settled on the Fitbit for the moment because the Apple Watch gave me too much information at the moment. And I would spend time going, oh my God, why is my heart rate here right now? And it wasn't abnormal. It was just higher than it had been 10 minutes ago. As someone sitting down and I'm looking for an edge on a bet, or I'm a content provider looking for interesting tidbits of information that your AI has surfaced, how do I sort of find the right thing, or the one that's going to help me at that moment?
Yeah, and I guess what we have to think about, again, I'm going to bring back convergence of betting, sports fan, sports games, sports lounges, and media empires. So when you look at that, you're all of a sudden looking at different target groups. So you have a new sports fan, you have a passionate sports fan that's considering crossing over into the betting realm, you have a very seasoned sports bettor who's looking for a new edge. So when you look at our over 2 million predictions a day that we provide that are, groundbreaking play-by-play predictions, the power of that is that you're able to take that and customize per your audience. So for that new sports fan, we're going to teach them about what a stat is, what is a three-pointer, And you know what? This top athlete we're predicting is going to make this many 3-pointers in the next quarter, all the way down to somebody who's just more focused on the spread and the lines for the game. We also provide that content. So when you look at everything we provide in that snippet format, it enables and empowers our B2B customers to take those bits and make them into teasable snippets, all the way to emailers and newsletters, all the way to using it into a podcast. So I think it's not like this. Traditionally, if you look at a sports betting portal, it's tables and tables of bets and line, plus 110, minus 110. This data takes it away from that. We're talking percentages. We're talking about what a stat is. We're featuring the athlete because the athlete is a favored, identity amongst all of us, whether we're betting or watching sports. So that's where we differentiate as well.
So one of the things we've seen in the sports world, and I apologize if I get too sports wonky for you here, is let's call them evolving metrics. When I grew up, you knew somebody's batting average. You didn't know all these new production metrics. Do you think is it one of the dreams that they'll be quoting like some new metric that your data has uncovered, and that becomes like wins over replacement or something that's just like a default in the sports world? Because it feels like that's sort of where you're headed.
You know what? And that's a great point, because with AI, it's so new, right? So you have human analysts that have done a fantastic job, right? But then when you throw an AI, a neural network into this, which is essentially a brain that continuously learns, that AI starts to pick up patterns. So the AI has produced for us sometimes a real streak in, for example, sleeper players. It will pull a player out and say, this player is going to have, an outstanding performance tonight. And we were like, where did this come from? So it senses these patterns, and that premium, content is what the machine is really, really good at. And I think that as we continue to evolve, we're going to start seeing patterns and different things that are going to deserve a new type of bet or a new type of content piece. So we're just so excited every time we review what the predictions are and what the outcomes were and what the new patterning is. It's tends to be overwhelming, actually.
So I have to assume Las Vegas has already come calling, because certainly, bookmakers are not going to allow people betting to have a tool that they don't have a tool. But with the teams, are you finding teams coming to you, or is there still resistance? Because we in a lot of the sports world, we've still gone with like hunches and scouts and, an old guy writing in a notebook. And have you found that this sort of resistance to data and AI has melted, or do you see it still?
It's accelerating because they're using it in a different way. They're using it to engage these new sports fans. Engagement is done through education and demystification. And when you can present content in a unique way that engages that fan, that makes them watch more sports, why wouldn't the leagues get involved with that? And as the taboo lifts, because sports betting becomes more regulated and more compliant, and it's driven by tech, and it's about quick snippets and really interesting insights into athletes, the leagues are embracing that because it gives them a whole new revenue stream and opportunity.
Do you worry about the pace of legalization? We saw it finally get legalized here in Florida, but it is not. It was quick in a few states, and it does seem to have hit a bit of a wall. Is that something you think about, or is the market just too big anyway?
You know what? There's a couple of moving parts to this. So, initially we were ahead of the curve with our technology, because you have to think of this infrastructure and the emerging tech here, old infrastructures, and everyone playing catch up, including legislation. So it's all actually going well because you need the books to catch up. Like, for example, we're already doing play by play prediction. The sports books have to enable technology for someone to bet in real time. It's the same with legislation, right? As it goes, all of a sudden you have, this, states like over, 22 states right now, that are ready for this. We still all need to help them catch up, and help the books catch up, and help DFS catch up, and help the media empires catch up. I think the remaining states will have an advantage because so much will have been done before we get there.
So basically every announcer can be Tony Romo and have an idea of what's
Yeah.
coming next.
Yes.
So where do people come into this? Because, as someone who, so I was a curator. I was the person who curated the news for Microsoft when they launched what was then the Windows 8 apps. Those are now done by robots. And our viewers have heard me complain about this a lot. It's now terrible because the AI doesn't have that last mile judgment. Obviously, with your product, AI can produce so much, but there is a human element, right? To make sure that
Yeah.
you're surfacing the right thing for the right client.
Yeah, and you know what? The human element tends to be the client. Like, for example, pre-playoffs this year for NBA and NHL, Steve Kornacki used our data to power his probabilities. So we presented the data to him, and he took that and was able to create a story out of that. So you have to remember that, the human part of our business ensures that that content resonates with the humans that we're serving it to. So, whether it's on the marketing side or the sales side, it's always got to be there as we're assessing markets. But we empower the human side of everything with technology.
And obviously you need a Steve Kornacki and someone who's really good at presenting that data. I mean, he was my go-to through the whole election, and I watched
Yes.
when they integrated him into the NFL playoffs, and it actually added a dimension to something that was previously entirely skippable. Like I can't say I'd watched half times or openings, but when you see Steve Kornacki up there, now of course if he could have mentioned Quarter4 maybe more prominently, that would have benefited. How fast do you expect to grow? Because this seems to me like if I was a team, if I was a sports book, if I was a daily fantasy site, even just a website with a sports section, that I'd be
Mhm.
calling you. How quickly is this going to scale here?
So this is really, so we initially came out B2C, business to consumer. We gave free predictions for the last, 2 years, but it was a study. We wanted to see what content was resonating with what users. We are now fully B2B, so we provide data to those organizations, that you mentioned, and we just launched our B2B services 3 weeks ago, after getting everything, ready for NFL season. And we have had a number of inbounds. It's been the first business where we do have an outbound campaign for sure, but we have had calls and meetings every single day. So it's been really positive for us to see this activity. Um, our fear is that, we're going to get, purchase requests before we can actually fulfill everything that we want to do in the product, because every empire wants to have their own technology stack right now. Groups like this are really attracted to them, but we still have so much to build, and our real-time predictions, are just, people are like, how do we even use it? It's so exciting. So I think that, the next year will be really, really telling for us. But our roadmap is to keep building this technology infrastructure out because it's so powerful.
Let me ask the sports fan question. Are you a partner with any and every team type service? Or if I come in and I'm the Boston Red Sox or the New York Yankees and I say, hey, I want this exclusively in my sport, is it that type of tool, or is it open to everybody the way like a draft service would be?
Because we're a new company, exclusivity is hard for us. We have been asked about exclusivity, and as where we are, I mean, I hate the word startup because we're actually business ready. We're young, but we're business ready. I mean, it's cutting off our feet before we run, right? Right now, it's to get it into as many hands as we possibly can. But hey, in the end, money talks. So if somebody came and said we're going to pay this for exclusivity, it's something that we'll always, review and consider. But it definitely has been brought up with us.
Well, I can certainly see an edge in having this. And as soon as we get off, I'm going to be texting my brother, who, as I mentioned before the show, is an executive for Tottenham in the Premier League, because this seems like a big advantage. Where do you see the sports betting market going? I'll set the table a little bit on that. We talked, and I alluded to it earlier, that this was like taboo 5 years ago. You couldn't talk about the line. You couldn't make a sports betting. You couldn't say, oh, wow, a safety was the first score in the Super Bowl, which is a traditional prop bet. You could talk about goofy prop bets, which was really the only thing. Now the line has moved to, it's openly discussed. There's shows on ESPN and Fox. How long do you think it's before sports betting is everywhere? It's on my phone, it's on my computer, in states where it's legal, and it's just not a taboo in any way.
And remember, the states that aren't legal right now have a huge free to play push. So they're allowing people to pretend bet. So essentially, it's still in every state because they're waiting for that state to legalize. They've captured their audience and then they turn on the access to betting, right?
And those
I
people, of course, are not betting at all. No person is placing an illegal bet in any of those states.
Right. I mean, we're going through that in Canada right now too, right? Because Canada legislation just passed for single event betting too. But I mean, it's, I think sports betting is going to be everywhere. But I think that, like anything, the cream will rise to the crop. The cream will rise to the top. Anything that doesn't make sense, or it's too much, or it's hokey, it doesn't resonate, that will clear away. And I think that it will just become an integrated part of these content empires. And like you said, these really big casino groups that are looking to harness league, media, tech. I just think it's going to become a suggestion during the game or a normal discussion point, and I think it's going to be talked about differently. I don't think it's going to be talked the way it has been, for the past 20 years. It's going to be very different conversation, around how somebody makes a bet and what they're going to bet on.
I'd be very excited as an announcer, frankly, as a show host, given what I do, if I could look and say, oh, wow, like there's an 80% chance this backup player is going to have a really good night. Now, obviously, a really studied person might have that insight,
Mm-hmm. Oh, yeah.
but the AI confirming it, I would think would be very valuable. Kelly, I'm going to ask sort of one last question. I'm not entirely sure how to ask it without being clumsy. So apologies if I get this a tiny bit wrong, but two women co-founders in the sports world.
Mm-hmm.
That's obviously inspirational. We've seen a number of women take jobs, coaching jobs, a GM in baseball. Does that factor in? Do you think about sort of inspiring the next generation to say, hey, you can do this as well?
Yeah, and it's also almost sometimes clumsy for me to answer that, because Danielle and I, we just are so passionate about this. We go to any room and we talk to anybody, and we don't really even think about it. That's just the way that we are in this business space. It's the way we are as entrepreneurs in general. But it is a rarity. It's a rarity in the betting space. It's a rarity in the sports space. But things are changing, and we have to think about the female betting market. It's an established market, and women like the way that betting's going. They like the content that's being produced. And women's sports, like, look at women's sports. So in order to diversify this market and to open up that new target market and to open up revenue streams, you need to consider 50% of the population that you've been ignoring. And I think the insight that we bring to that empowers us as an organization. And I hope that every person out there looks at what we're doing from a business perspective and says they're pushing boundaries and they're going into a space and then diversifying it. And I hope that resonates not only with women. I hope it resonates with everybody who's ever been challenged on pushing things really, really hard. And we hope to lead by example for sure.
So at Seven Investing, one of the things we say, we're empowering you to invest in your future. And one of our goals is to take people, whether they be young or old, but often they are young, and show them how long-term investing works and why it's a good idea. Obviously, sports betting is not, I don't want to say the sure thing, but the historically successful thing that long-term investing has been. But is there an education component? Because I know, as someone who's a big sports fan, who is a big Vegas person, I was very wary when I started placing anything other than straight, bets against the line. And even a lot of people wouldn't understand what the line is. How do you sort of get that education out there so people can make responsible sports bets? I don't think we want to encourage people to be making a ton of bets, but putting $20 down on a game that takes you away from playing 5 hours of blackjack in Vegas is actually a pretty good investment. So how do you sort of hit that part of it?
Yeah, so basically, you probably know the term micro betting, right? So when you look at the new sports fan or the new bettor who's learning, micro bets are a pretty safe place for them to be. If they're going to pick one thing, to bet on that quarter, and it's their favorite athlete, and they've looked at some prediction and they've looked at some of the back analysis that that content provider is also giving them, they feel safe enough. They've been educated, they understand the history on that athlete or whatever. So to push the button, on that micro bet is not nearly as disastrous as historical betting, like that stigma that you talked about, or that traditional bettor that gives away the house, their own house, to the house, right? So I think that education is a big part, and it's upon the responsibility of everybody who's producing this content moving forward to engage that new type of tech savvy bettor. And I think that positioning it and demystifying is definitely an educational piece.
Kelly Brooks, the company is Quarter4. Normally, this is when I ask, how do we get in touch with you? But I'm not entirely sure that many sports executives are watching. It's possible. That's a world where at least I have some friends through my brother. But if somebody wanted to get in touch with you, how would they go about and do that?
Quarter4.io. And I am on LinkedIn. I am always willing. Danielle and I talk to everybody. We never say no to talking to somebody. So please feel free to reach out to me on LinkedIn as well.
Well, Kelly Brooks, as someone who this morning saw the odds of the Patriots winning the Super Bowl and briefly considered getting on a plane to Las Vegas so I could place that bet, which is at some crazy, was it like 48-1 or something like that, which, now that would be a bad idea, but if that was legal here in Florida, which it will be soon, I would absolutely drive over to the Isle Casino or the Hard Rock and make that bet. I look forward to this world getting more open. I look forward to following what Quarter4 is doing, because from an information consumption point of view, it just sounds like a lot of fun. And I am definitely looking forward to introducing you to my brother. Thank you for doing this. And we will keep tabs on this company, because I don't think people watching understand just how quickly this world is going to grow. And data is a lot more interesting to me than any of the players. Kelly, thank you.
Thank you, Dan. Take care.